three of the best baseball talents of all time, but like they didn't seem to mesh. And not that I can say anything because I look down all the time, but Alex was like, he was good, but like he was reading too much after the game. And looking at the wrong camera, which I do all the time too. So maybe I'm Alex Rodriguez. I'm A-Rod.
You're the A-Rod?
I'm A-Rod of video.
Are you on steroids right now? Because we need to know.
Trust me, I'm not, unless it's about making my gut bigger, then yes. All right, we're live. So I can.
All right, we are live. So
just give me 1 second. I'm just going to pull this up so I'm not doing it loud while we're going.
So, Matt, what is a good starter bow tie starter pack? What are like the essentials? How would you?
Well, I would always say get a pre-tied one, at least one, and then I would get maybe two regular, ones that you have to tie yourself, because that gives you an opportunity.
We got lots of eyes on us, so let's get going.
Okay, if you guys are ready.
Mm-hmm.
And welcome to College Football Now, our weekly pick segment for college football. We took the week off. We would have had the week off anyway.
We would have had it anyways because
thanks
of Hurricane Matthew.
But you were gone last week. You were in Dallas as the storm bearing your name was coming to town and participating in a mock college playoff selection process.
Yes, I got to sit, was one of a dozen people to sit in, and actually got to sit and stand in for Barry Alvarez, Wisconsin athletic director, and learned kind of what is involved in selecting not only the four teams that go in the playoff, but the top 25. And interesting process, kind of opened my eyes a little bit on how difficult it can be to do that, and also the idea of what goes into picking some of those teams. And I think to me that was very interesting, not just statistical analysis, but the amount of eyes on TVs, eyes on games, that kind of stuff. And to me it was an incredible experience, but a little harrowing coming back into the state with the hurricane bearing down.
And we'll talk about the hurricane some in games that were affected from last week. But so when the armchair people start complaining about the playoff committee and thinking that it's all, not that we believe them anyway, but now you really have the experience of knowing just how much goes into getting it as right as they can.
Yeah, and some of it also goes to we talk about conference championships, how important they are, and we've talked about that before. The group has. I think it really does show how important they are to you when you're looking at teams and how they're ranked, and you look at where they're at. Conference championships do make a big impact. You look at a situation like Houston, for instance. We didn't do this year's teams, for the playoff. We did season of 2010. But even like when you're looking at a school that's maybe not in a Power 5 conference, I think seeing that a school like Houston, where they're going to be at, what they had to do to get there, was kind of an eye-opening experience, and kind of shows you where some of these teams can wind up being ranked and where they're at. And we did everything in 4 hours. Listen, the group does anywhere from 14 to 24 hours of discussion and process. So definitely.
So you're saying you're better than the main group. That's what
No.
You guys should be doing it because you're more efficient and better than the real ones. This is a live show talking about college football. We have Twitter questions lined up. We also will take questions on Facebook Live if you're watching us on Facebook Live. So ask a question anytime and we will get to them. And we are back to football this week. Weather looks good, so that is a nice change. UCF did not play last weekend. They had a Friday night game that was scheduled, and it, of course, was postponed. They both had an open week, November 5th.
Yes.
This week, Temple comes in, Saturday night game at 7:30. Two of the top four defenses in the American are playing in this one. Temple number 3, UCF number 4, and they come in. It's a triple option. The Temple, they like to mix that in. You got to hope that UCF had more time to get ready for it with the extra day or extra week off as it ends up being in this one. UCF comes into this game 2 weeks removed now from a big win on the road at East Carolina, which we didn't really get a chance to talk about because we weren't here last weekend. But that kind of, to me, was the FIU win was okay, but FIU's terrible. But I thought the win against East Carolina maybe showed that UCF is on track. And I'm picking UCF to win this game over Temple. This is a game they lost last year at Temple. But I think the Knights continue on, and I actually have them in my bowl projections now. I have UCF being bowl eligible this year.
Well, I mean, you look at what they were able to do. A couple weeks ago against East Carolina, offense is obviously playing better. Mackenzie Milton wasn't starting that game because he appeared to be injured. His foot was injured. Looked like Justin Holman stepped back into the starting quarterback position, was able to lead the offense. I think what impressed me the most was the defense. The defense is playing at a different level than we've seen the last couple of years. I think having another week off can help out, whether it's going to be Mackenzie Milton at quarterback, whether it's going to be Justin Holman. I think always having an extra week to kind of rest up, get those bumps and bruises, kind of taken care of, will help things out as well. And I think, again, facing a Temple team that beat them last year, I think this is a different UCF squad. I think Temple is going to get their hands full with this game because UCF had a week off, because UCF is playing at a different level. I think UCF wins this game. I agree with you. I think this team right now is a bowl-eligible team. I think you look at what they've been able to do with the offense, with the defense. I think Scott Frost obviously has got this team in the right direction. They get turnovers now. They're able to kind of be more of an attacking defense. That's helped as well. Adrian Killings, obviously one of the best players we've seen in quite some time for UCF. They've been putting together a pretty spectacular performance. Overall, that's why I think UCF wins this game.
And I think it tells you also last year, despite the record, which we know what it was, there was some talent there at UCF, and it was just a matter of one believing in themselves again, because we saw so much of it deflate last year, and also bring in some of the new talent, and certainly fun to watch UCF right now. We both have UCF winning this one. In fact, and maybe we'll agree on a lot of things today.
Yeah, we're actually
it's our Cubs unity.
Cubs unity, that's what it is. We're going to put it all together. So
we're going to talk Missouri, Florida next, and they play Saturday, 4 p.m. on the SEC Network. Before we get to that, I want to talk about the side story with this one that has been
the side story or side show.
The side story. It's been what everybody's been talking about. Not the Missouri game. It's the game that didn't take place because of Hurricane Matthew. Of course, LSU visiting Florida this past week. Canceled late with the hurricane coming. It was a late announcement, a late decision. Differing stories from each side. LSU saying they offered, hey, you can come play at our place. We'll play on Sunday. We'll play in front of an empty stadium on Sunday. Florida saying, we got 50 to 60 of our kids. They live in a hurricane warning area. We're going to have police are going to be busy, fire staff, emergency personnel busy. The people who work at the stadium are busy. We just can't do it this weekend. And now the question is going to be, will this game be played again? Should it be played again? How are they going to make it play again? They don't have the same bye week. They both have the weekend before Thanksgiving. That Saturday, they both play a lesser opponent, a non-conference opponent. Certainly buyouts are capable in that one, but this is a mess, and it's a bunch of name calling, and it looks bad, I think, on both sides, LSU and Florida, maybe even worse on the LSU side. But what is going to happen with this game?
Well, I think, honestly, what bothers me about this whole situation is really what should have happened from the forefront is the SEC should have stepped in. This should have been something that, Commissioner Greg Sankey got involved and said, listen, let's all get at the same table. Let's keep the comments private. We don't need to be pointing fingers and name calling in this situation. Because, again, this is a situation we're talking about. A hurricane comes through. You have people affected by the game, by the hurricane, whether it was the players themselves or their families, whether it's security, police, whether it's down to concessions. I mean, everybody was affected by the storm in some way or another. So to say that they could have played this game on a Sunday, maybe. I mean, but again,
well, it's also easy to say when it drifted off the coast.
If this had hit us as they expected to hit us, there's no way we'd be talking about this. But this all comes down to money, everybody. This comes down to, Florida doesn't want to give up having a home game in front of a top-tier opponent, which would generate lots of money. LSU doesn't want to give up their home game against a South Alabama team down the road because, again, that draws revenue and puts money in their pocket. So at some point, I think the sides are going to sit down. I think the SEC is going to step in. This may even involve bringing the Sun Belt in, when it comes down to some of the games they had scheduled with South Alabama. They may have to just hand some checks out, write some checks and say, here's what's going to happen. You're going to move this game around. You're going to move that game around. I know there's been some discussion about possibly moving this game to the week of the SEC Championship, pushing the SEC Championship back another week to December 10th. I don't think that's going to happen at all. I think the College Football Playoff group doesn't want to see that weekend get disrupted by something like this because that throws everything in disarray. Imagine all these other conferences playing their championship game, and then you have to wait a whole week to figure out where your teams are going to end up being. I don't think that's going to be the case. They're going to play this game at some point. Or else what they'll do is they'll wait a couple weeks and see if something else maybe happens. Like, let's say Florida loses a game that they're not supposed to lose. LSU loses a game they're not supposed to lose. And then it becomes a factor of these two teams not being a factor in the races. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think these two teams are going to be right there. So they're going to have to play this game some way or another.
They are playing a game at Gainesville on Saturday, and is the Gators and Missouri. And Luke Del Rio will be back. He will start. Said he could have been back for LSU, so that's not why they canceled the game. But he is back to start. Just some of the things I was looking at heading this game. Florida's defense in the SEC, they are tops in passing D, total D, scoring D. They are second in rush D and sacks. I mean, the success of these Florida Gators has been on the defense. Missouri comes in unheralded. There's some questions. The only thing they do have is they have Drew Lock. He's going to throw the ball a lot, and he has so far this year. 14 touchdown passes, over 1,600 total yards passing. That's first and second in the SEC. That is the only chance Missouri has in this one to even scare Florida, and I don't think Missouri, Drew Lock's put up those numbers against teams that don't have defense anywhere near as good as this Florida D. I'm taking the Gators in this one despite all the distractions. I think this may be one of the Gators' better games because they're that much better in Missouri. They're at home. They've had time to prepare. I think the matchup really favors the Gators in this one. I say Florida wins this one, keeps the pressure on the SEC commish to figure out that LSU game because the Gators are going to be in the hunt for the SEC East title, especially with a game we're going to talk about later that Tennessee has coming up, which could be another loss for them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Florida wins this game. I think having a week off helped them out a little bit. I think obviously it gave Luke Del Rio some time to get a little healthier. I think it gave the offense some time to kind of get back into the rhythm, having him back behind center for that game. I think one of the things I want to see is I want to see Florida. Florida's only had one game this season where I felt like they played Florida football above and beyond the team they're playing. I think other games, I think they've played down to their opponent, so to speak. You know, I don't think the rushing attack hasn't been anywhere near as dominant as it probably should be. I think they need to quit trying to do this 3 or 4 running back situation. I think they need to pick 1 or 2 guys and go from there. I think they need to get the ball to their playmakers. They need to get the ball to their wide receivers. They need to take advantage of scoring opportunities. I think that's definitely what needs to happen. And I think on the defensive side, there needs to be more pressure. There really does need to be more pressure on the quarterback because that's only going to set up opportunities to get turnovers. I think the secondary has been a little weak at times, and I think they've kind of been lax when it comes to letting guys being wide open. I think they need to be more physical. There's going to be more physicality in the secondary. I think they need to bump receivers early on, get them off their routes, and then kind of take advantage of that situation because, as you mentioned, Florida's defense is outstanding. There's no reason why they shouldn't be dominating Missouri in this game.
Yeah, and the secondary is going to be the one testing in this game. Last 6 quarters for the Gators, not really highlight material. It's not something anybody wants to remember, so see if they can turn that around. Last Saturday night, or maybe it was even Sunday morning, Florida State won a game with a blocked extra point. They knocked off Miami for the 7th consecutive time. They go home now. They play Wake Forest. 3:30 on Saturday. We can remember the time when this would have been a cupcake game, but Wake Forest back again, 5-1, a game away from being bowl eligible, which is shocking to me, who as I handle bowl projections. This is a good Wake Forest team, not a great Wake Forest team, not a Wake Forest team. The last time they went 5-1 was in 2006 when they won the ACC title. But it's a good team. This is a team that could test Florida State for a while, but quietly, and I say this quietly because everybody knows his name, Dalvin Cook leads the nation in total yards from scrimmage. He had a big game against Miami. He's second in the NCAA in total yards from scrimmage per game. I mean, so he is quietly kind of hitting his stride here for the Seminoles. I think you'll see more of that this week. I have Florida State winning this one. They get the cobwebs off from the Miami win early, and then they pull away in the second half. But Dalvin Cook, he's rounding into shape, and he may have already damaged his Heisman hopes with the early games, but he's rounding into shape as one of the best running backs, which we knew he was, and that's going to power Florida State in this one.
Yeah, well, I have Dalvin Cook in my Heisman watch this week because I actually
have
been impressed with the 3.
He's back.
He's back. You know, the first 3 games, obviously, he didn't play anywhere near to what I think people thought he was going to do. Had that big performance against USF that kind of broke out, but then he kind of went back a little bit. But I feel like his last 3 games and what he did against Miami were very impressive. I think we saw the yards from scrimmage. Again, he's been powering Florida State's offense. Listen, Florida State last year ran the ball about 48% of the time. This year, they're running the ball about 56, 57% of the time. So I think Cook is becoming a major factor in this offensive scheme. That allows DeAndre Francois the time to develop as a quarterback. He's being able to find some receivers downfield. I think this Miami win was huge for them. Not just because, obviously, the win, but you see how they lost, against North Carolina. You saw they lost to Louisville. I think that Miami game was like they took a punch in the face. and they were able to withstand it. So I think that's going to help Florida State as they move forward. I think going into this week, too, especially against the Wake Forest team that they know is playing better than they have in the past, I think that provides Florida State with a little bit more of an opportunity to show, like, say, listen, everyone's writing us off. We're not going to win the playoff. We still can be a factor in the ACC. But to do that, we have to win these games, and I think that's why Florida State's going to win this game.
As some of the guys said after the game, it's about winning the state championship, and that's why that win over Miami was big. And, of course, there's a game with Florida, the Gators. They play later in the year. It's a pretty known game. Miami, the team we just talked about, losing there at home against North Carolina, the team that beat Florida State just 2 weeks ago. Hurricanes looking to bounce back after that disappointing loss to Florida State where they had a 13-point lead and then tied it up late before the extra point was blocked. You can look at that game, and question maybe some of Mark Richt's coaching decisions in that, but we know how Florida State makes changes. I actually look at this game and think this is a game Miami is going to bounce back in. And yeah, North Carolina beat Florida State, but I'm looking at matchups, and I think this Miami team is better than North Carolina. They get them at home. They're going to be hungry, disappointed after last week. I'm taking the Hurricanes in this one, in a close one, but to knock off Carolina in that afternoon game.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you in that because I think what impresses me most about Miami early on is the physicality of their defense. I mean, we saw what they were able to do. I mean, they were punishing DeAndre Francois in the backfield and really made him pay it sometimes for holding on to the football to the very last second. I think that's going to help Miami in this situation. I think if they can continue to be aggressive on the defensive front, continue to get at the quarterback, I think that's going to help them out. I know the linebackers in the secondary are a little bit shallow at times because of injuries and guys leaving, but I still think this defense is better. And then you look at Brad Kaya. If Brad Kaya is 100% in this game, I think obviously that's going to help them out tremendously. This running attack was kind of put in check by Florida State's defense last week. I expect them to bounce back again. I expect them to put up big yards. And they saw what North Carolina did to Florida State a couple weeks ago, so they know that they can't just jump out to a lead and then hold on, and just let things kind of coast. They've got to continue to put their foot down. Listen, as bad of a loss that was for Miami, they're still in the race for the Coastal. So if they can take care of business, they win the Coastal, they're back in the talking about, ACC championship.
Yeah, I feel a good learning experience.
Yes,
for the Hurricanes. I think
as disappointing as it was a loss, again, I think those are games that you can kind of look at and say that's only going to help this program grow under Mark Richt.
As you know, we are live. You can ask questions on Facebook. We also have Twitter questions. We actually have a Twitter question coming up after this next game we're going to talk about. And Matt, this is a game of our broken dreams because we had both of these teams in the playoff on our preseason videos, which we've since burned and deleted, and you can't find them anywhere to have proof of this. But
I don't know who deleted that button.
I don't know. Thank goodness I'm tech savvy. I had Stanford in the playoff. You had Notre Dame in the playoff. Stanford has lost 2 games by obscene amounts. Notre Dame 2-4 after a 10-3 loss to the NC State. And I could go on a side rant and say that game should never even been played, but they played it. Some questionable play calling for Notre Dame trying to pass the ball in that weather, but nonetheless, Notre Dame comes into this game 2-4, suffering. Stanford comes in. Christian McCaffrey, quite possibly the best player in college football, but he hasn't shown it so far. He's been able to be held in check, only averaging 104 yards rushing a game. A lot of Stanford's problems can be directed perhaps to that, but they've got issues all overhead in this one. This is on our pick list because these are teams that we thought this game was going to be huge, but which team is going to suffer more? I'm picking Stanford in this one. I'm still believing a little bit in my pick that they're not as terrible as some may think, but I think Stanford beats Notre Dame. Notre Dame 2-5, struggling to make a bowl after they were picked by some.
Yes.
To be in the playoff, that things could get ugly there in South Bend.
And that's true. I think they will be if they go 2-5. Listen, I think Stanford wins this game. I mean, part of Stanford's problems in the last couple of weeks have been based on the offensive line. They've given up so many sacks. You saw what Washington took care of them. You saw what Washington State was able to do to them. I mean, Christian McCaffrey hasn't been able to find any sort of running room whatsoever, and they haven't been able to utilize him outside of the rushing attack. I mean, as a receiver, he hasn't even done a whole lot. And kick returns. I think that was my concern with Stanford going into the season is when you become kind of one-dimensional and everyone focuses on one guy, I think that can harm you. And I think we've seen that in the last couple of weeks. Once teams have been able to slow down McCaffrey, I think that's hurt them, trying to find guys to step up and make plays. Now, that being said, on the flip side, Notre Dame has played horrifically. And, I mean, again, Last week, I thought some play calling decisions were not handled very well. I don't understand why Brian Kelly didn't try to change up the offense a little bit, knowing you're going into a game that's going to be a sloppy, slip and slide fest, basically with the weather. I think you should change some things up. I know that Notre Dame's offense isn't geared towards being a running attack type offense, but I think there's ways you could have done that with maybe some screen passes, some bubble passes, those kind of things. I just think defensively, yes, this team has gotten better since they've made the change at defensive coordinator, but I feel like they're not doing enough, especially offensively, to take advantage of the situation. I think Stanford wins, but I think this is going to be a really ugly, low-scoring affair.
And our Twitter question comes from Elk Mac, and he says to you, Matt, who will replace Brian Kelly as head coach at Notre Dame next year? Wow face, smiley face. But I don't know. It's funny, but if they're 2-5, that seat is going to be really hot there in South Bend, right?
I mean, the last coach to really kind of have this kind of struggles, really was Charlie Weiss, and Weiss had just signed a big 10-year deal, and Weiss wasn't able to stick around. There's a short window for people to put up with a coach that loses at Notre Dame. We've seen it in the past. Yes, he's done a pretty amazing job. They're coming off a 10-win season last year. They went to a national championship in 2012. But I think there's a lot of concern because this team isn't playing up to any way with expectations were supposed to be going into the season. I know they've got two talented quarterbacks. It took them a while to finally settle on Deshaun Kaiser. I feel like offensively they struggle at times. They don't look like a team that they've had to look like. I think defensively, obviously, anytime you fire a defensive coordinator 4 or 5 games in the season, that's never a good look. If Notre Dame doesn't get to a bowl game, I can guarantee that Kelly is going to be on the hot seat. Now, who replaces him? I think Notre Dame always goes after semi-well-established coaches. I think Kelly obviously had a good degree, a pedigree with him going forward of that as well. I think Tom Herman's name will always come up, obviously. I think Les Miles, a guy who doesn't have a job right now, will be brought up as well. And there's going to be some guys maybe that you don't think of that will be thrown out. I wouldn't be shocked to hear Nick Saban's name come up, and I know that's but Notre Dame's probably the only school that has enough money to throw at Nick Saban that could maybe possibly present him to go up and try to coach the Irish. I don't know why he would leave, and I'm not saying he's going to, but that's a name you'll probably hear thrown out there as well. I don't think you'll hear an unestablished coach. I don't think you'll hear someone like a PJ Fleck or someone like that. I just think it's going to be someone, they want a big name hire, and they want someone they can guarantee will come in and do things.
Les Miles would have that offense ready to be boring in the rain, that's for sure.
Well, and again, I mean that's why Herman's name, Urban Meyer always felt like Notre Dame was his dream job. He said that many, many times. I don't think Urban Meyer's leaving Ohio State to take the Notre Dame's job.
Notre Dame was his dream job. Ohio State was his dream A job.
Job.
It's right there. It's 1-1A.
And again, and I'm not 100% sure that they fire Brian Kelly. I'm saying there's always the possibility that if they turn out, just depends how bad it gets. If it gets to 4-8 or 3-9, I think it's going to be awful hard for him to stick around. But if he can salvage some games and get some wins, and maybe they somehow get to that 500 mark, I think Kelly stays for another year at least.
Thank you, Elk Mac, for the question.
Yes, thank you very much.
A couple more Twitter questions. I'm going to speed up a little bit. We're going to skip through Arizona State and Colorado. We both picked Colorado. I think we both like what the Buffaloes have done this year. Number 12, Ole Miss, is heading to play number 22, Arkansas, on Saturday night on ESPN. Ole Miss, the highest 2-loss team ranked in the country. One of 8 FBS schools. They score at least 34 points a game. They've gotten over 500 yards total offense the last 2 games out there. I'm going to make my pick quick. It's going to be Ole Miss. If there's any team that's as good as Alabama in the SEC, it's Ole Miss. They already lost to Alabama, but I think Ole Miss is like the second best team in the SEC, and they're going to prove it this week and knock off Arkansas on the road.
Well, I don't know if they're the second best team in the SEC. I will agree that I do think they'll beat Arkansas. I think obviously as long as Chad
Kelly's... They only play the halves. They're the best team in the country. Yes, they're the best team in the country. They only play first half.
As long as Chad Kelly's not getting involved in high school football skirmishes, I think he'll be fine. Again, I think Ole Miss is now starting to find themselves. They're finding their identity. The offense has looked really well. I think defensively they're not as sharp as they've been the last couple of years, obviously. I think Arkansas has played a brilliant game so far this year. You look at what they've been able to do. Just running into this offense is going to be tough. Let's not forget, this was the 4th and 22 lateral game last year that really, it changed everything because if Ole Miss wins that game, Ole Miss goes to the SEC championship, and then Alabama may not even win the national title, obviously. So if buts, candy nuts, all that. So that's
And if there's a team that Ole Miss struggle, this is their whammy. Brett Bielema has owned Ole Miss.
He's owned them, and he does a
at
really good job.
Arkansas. So
but I think
he gets them at home.
I think Ole Miss wins this game, and I think it's going to be high scoring, but it may be close.
Yeah, and Austin Allen, guy for Arkansas, watch for him in this game.
Oh, yes.
Two big games involving two top 10 teams. The first one we kind of mentioned already. Number 1 Alabama visits number 9 Tennessee on Saturday afternoon. It's the CBS game at 3:30. The 99th meeting between these two schools. They've met every year except one since, I think, 1928. This is a rivalry. This is a game that's going to have SEC East it's going to have an impact on that, along with everything else. Tennessee finally caught up with them last weekend. The slow start, they were able to get back into the game, and Texas A&M turned the ball over just a blank load of times, and it really hurt them in that one. They won't be able to come back. If they fall behind Alabama early, they're done in this one. Alabama has won 18 straight games. If they win this one, it'll match the longest they've had under Nick Saban. This is going to tie the longest win streak under Saban. Alabama wins this one.
Yeah, listen, kudos to Tennessee. Oh, living on a prayer, for the last, 4 or 5 games, it seems like, that finally caught up with them last week. Tennessee leads the country with 21 fumbles. I couldn't believe this stat. Amazing to think. I think it was either 8 of those have been lost, 5 of those last week against Texas A&M. This team plays with house money and is just, really, it kind of gets loosey-goosey at times. That's why I think they fall. That's why they kind of fall down as much. They're only averaging 10 points per half the last 3 games, but 30 points per half the second half of those games. So obviously you can see the statistical breakdown. I think Alabama's too good of a team in this situation. Tennessee turns the ball too much. They have too many issues with injuries going forward. And I think offensively, as great as Josh Dobbs has been, he hasn't been as sharp as he could be. Talking about the second half of those games probably as well. I like what Alabama's doing. I think Alabama wins this game. And I think this really kind of opens up the SEC East race, as you mentioned. If Florida can continue to do what they're doing, we could see some impacts on that race as well.
Alabama has scored 9 non-offensive touchdowns so far this season. They're good everywhere.
They're good everywhere. You talk about special teams, you talk about defense, you talk about offense. They score all different ways, and that makes them a complete team.
We got a comment from Mildred Grissom, says Arkansas already beat them this season. Get it right, but I don't know what that means. But I appreciate.
Ole Miss, or
I guess I appreciate you watching and commenting. Last game we're going to talk about: number 2 Ohio State at number 8 Wisconsin. The primetime game. We know what the Buckeyes do under Urban Meyer on the road. They just win. I was going to take Wisconsin in this game, and I've already messed that up once so far this year. But Ohio State struggled with Indiana, a good Indiana team, struggled to move the ball through the air. So what did they do? JT Barrett ran the ball. They're able, when you're as talented as that Ohio State offense is and have so many different pieces, you can find different ways to get things done. So while they struggled to move the ball through the air against Indiana, JT Barrett found a way to get it done on the ground. I think they'll be able to do that against Wisconsin. This is obviously a huge matchup and one of the big games that are go a long way in determining who will probably be playing in the playoff. But I think that Ohio State offense just will find different ways to get at this really tough Wisconsin defense. And the Ohio State defense will shut Wisconsin down just enough. Wisconsin will still have their fourth quarter jump around in the end zone, and it still will be close. But Ohio State wins this one and keeps it online for that huge game against Michigan at the end of the year if they can both win their way there.
Yeah, I think Ohio State wins this one. And what I want to focus on is the Ohio State's defense. I mean, you talk about how young and talented they are of a group. You saw what they've been able to lead the Big Ten in interceptions. They really will take advantage of Wisconsin, who has a young quarterback in play, and really kind of at times has struggled offensively. This is Wisconsin really kind of is the typical Big Ten team. Really kind of ground and pound with using a little bit of a passing attack. I think there's too much talent on Ohio State's sideline. And I also want to point out another stat that I'll throw out there. Urban Meyer is 19-0 on the road at Ohio State.
They don't lose on the road.
They don't lose on the road. He's going to be 20-0.
We agreed on every pick.
High five.
We are Cubs United. Go Cubbies.
Fly the W.
Before we get this done, let's run through some Twitter questions.
Yes.
Drew Stilling sent us a bunch of them.
Thank you, Drew. I appreciate it.
We appreciate them because they're good questions. We're going to get to a couple of them. Lightning fast questions here. First question, future of Texas, Charlie Strong.
I think Charlie Strong will be will be out at the end of the year. I don't think that there's any chance unless he wins every remaining game and can find a way into the New Year's 6 games. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think he's going to be done.
This person is still insisting that Arkansas beat Ole Miss this season. They haven't played yet this season, but I do appreciate you watching on Facebook.
Thank you. Last season they beat him.
Last season they beat him.
Yes.
It was a crazy finish, we know. Next Twitter question, same guy, Drew. Heisman favorite, also should be Heisman nominee that many are ignoring.
The Heisman favorite's got to be Lamar Jackson right now. I mean, I still put him up there. I know they lost. I know Deshaun Watson is right up there as well. But I think Jackson's put up some video game-like numbers. I think that'll help him out as well. If he stumbles in a game down the road, I think you'll see Deshaun Watson get up there. Heisman favorite or Heisman candidate that we're not talking about maybe is Jabril Peppers, I think, from Michigan. I think a guy who's put up some big numbers. And now Jim Harbaugh, Michigan coach, has kind of come out and said he's a Heisman-type candidate, which makes me think he's going to probably try to find ways to get him the ball, to kind of get him up there and put some stats. He's a guy that no one's talking about as much, but starting to pick up a lot of traction.
Love those two-way players. Last question that we're going to do this week before we're out of here. Another one from Drew. Coach of the year and the worst coaching performance. So let's start first. Your coach of the year so far.
Coach of the year so far. I mean, I know people are gonna. It's got to be Dabo Swinney. I mean, I look at what Clemson's done. I know that they're where they're supposed to be, but considering how badly they started and the expectations, and then they were able to beat Louisville. If they win the ACC and they beat Florida State, I think he's got to be coach of the year. Worst coach, I think, and my family's going to kill me for this. I think Brian Kelly. I think Brian Kelly has looked bad this year. I mean, bad coaching decisions, they're 2-4. Still a chance to make it up, but just right now, bad decisions.
I agree with you on the worst coach, especially against that NC State game and the way they've been doing. I'm going to say, and we always look for like the best coaches, the up and coming.
Yes.
I'm going to give it to Nick Saban because
up and coming.
No, I'm saying, but who's surprised?
No, but
Nick Saban, this is a coach of the year performance because you've got a true freshman running the offense. You've got an entire NFL rosters of guys that have been drafted from that team from the last 4 or 5 years, and they are the best team, top to bottom, around everything. They can be beaten, but if you look at that team and how they're playing, and a bunch of young guys and guys that hadn't been in that position before, and they're all stepping up and playing well, you've got to give him credit. And perhaps you might get to a point where you stop getting credit for that, but Saban deserves credit for that.
But I will throw another name, Urban Meyer. I just thought about that. With as much
and that's even more so with
talent,
guys
yeah,
gone.
I mean, he's so much talent, but he only had 6 returning starters. To have that kind of performance, to be where they're at right now, you got to give Urban Meyer credit. I know people hate when you say that, but Urban's done a pretty good job.
Yeah, so everybody, the coach of the year won't be Nick Saban. It won't be Urban Meyer.
No, it won't be any of those guys.
But those are the two best
right
coaches.
Now,
those are the two best
and
coaches.
And Brian Kelly, by the end of it all, may not be the worst coach.
And maybe Jim Harbaugh. Maybe I should have said Jim Harbaugh because Michigan.
Well, you could just take the top 5
they're
coaches, top 5 teams.
But I mean, we didn't think that Michigan would be where they are this year.
So.
But I don't think Dabo's winning. I'm not giving him a coach of the year. I don't care. I don't care where
Sorry,
they're
Dabo.
right now.
I tried.
All right, we're done. No Hurricane Matthew out there, and
I took care of it.
You did, and he drove through it.
I did drive through it. But that's another story.
That's
for the after show, everyone. We'll talk about that during our after show.
Don't take any advice from this guy. He drove through a hurricane. For Matt Michelle, I'm Brant Parsons. Thanks for watching. We're here every Wednesday through the end of college football season right here at OrlandoSentinel.com.